Hello. Mike, how's it going?
Mike Rimmer, when the red light's on, he's on, baby!
Welcome to Rimmerama. Please pay attention to the following safety announcement. You are currently travelling in an intercontinental Cross Rhythms radio show. This show has emergency exits here, here, and here.
Fresh.
We both had pre-show ice lollies, which in the temperature in Cross Rhythms is very high, so that kind of helps.
Says might have to open the door.
Well, maybe we need to think about that.
Maybe.
Okay, one of the things that we need to tell you about is who's on the show tonight. Tony Cummings will arrive very, very soon, and he'll...
forgot it's Wednesday.
Yeah, it's Wednesday, so he'll bring a pile of new music with him. Tim Hughes is at the Big Church Day Out. We've got the press conference from that, which we'll play you soon. Gary D was editing that this morning. SIDney Howard will be on the phone in the second hour of the show from SIDzCarbonatedMilk. They last made an album 10 years ago, and so they're the indiest of indie bands, basically.
One of the great things about Cross Rhythms is that we get a chance over the years to see artists grow. Very often we see them right at the beginning of their career when they made their very, very first recording, and then, you know, and if it's really good, we'll play it. We don't care whether it's a little tiny independent release or a big time album. And then gradually, as the years go on, they you know, it's encouraging for them and for us to see them get more and more popular. At least, you know, stardom doesn't really come into it for most of the people working in Christian ministry. But at least we see them, you know, get popular and So Survivor and things like that.
Tony Cummings is with me. Very soon we're going to be talking to SIDney Howard from SIDzCarbonatedMilk. He's going to be on the phone. I've got no idea what that's going to be like.
That should be...
Because I've been listening to the album today. I was listening to the album and Gary D suddenly was kind of like, what's this?
Yeah.
And because it was a certain style, and then there was just like this instrumental piano thing, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was very strange.
Which is very strange. And I'm going, it's just SIDzCarbonatedMilk. Just enjoy it. Don't try and understand it.
Don't try and relate to it all.
Yeah. So we'll find out from SIDney Howard more about what the heck's going on with that. But it's a mind-boggling album.
I'm looking forward to this interview, like few that we've had in the last few years. It should be really out there.
All right, then. 10 years ago, I reviewed an album by SIDzCarbonatedMilk, which I thought was fantastic because it was totally off the wall and not a little strange. But I like that about SIDzCarbonatedMilk. And then never heard anything again after that. And then 10 years later, finally got around to a follow-up. And so we got a new album called the Mune-Pi Parables. And from SIDzCarbonatedMilk, let's welcome SIDney Howard. Hello, SIDney.
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
It's going very well. I think I interviewed you last time, the last album, 10 years ago, didn't I?
I'm sorry?
I interviewed you 10 years ago, didn't I?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it was... there's a very interesting story behind that, which I know we don't have time for right now, but we'll talk about it later.
so I remember liking the album and wanting to get you on the radio, but I thought you were dead and gone and you were never going to make any more music ever again. So why is it taking you 10 years to make a follow-up?
Well, in short, my partner on this album, on the last album, Jack Marchbanks, had a day job working in the election at that time between George Bush and Al Gore.
Oh, it's his fault, is it?
And yeah, and then I remember him saying to me that, well, you know, the election is right around the corner. They're going to wrap it up, and I'll have time to just really put my efforts into this. And then, you know, what happened, history took over from that. And, you know, that took us into December, which Christmas time is not a good time to try to do a lot of marketing and such. And January came around, I got called into jury duty, and while I was in jury duty, we found out that a landlord had sold the home where we were living. So we had to rush out and try to find a home, and we didn't get there in time, so we spent about a month in a hotel with 2 teenage kids, which is an adventure in itself. And then by the time we found a place, I had to build a new studio, so we had lost all the momentum on that project. And I was a little disappointed by that. I just threw myself into working commercially.
Okay.
And then we just really decided to do it again in 2008.
Oh, right. So you just took a break for 8 years, 7 years.
Yeah, just healed wounds.
Got over the disappointment. How you see? I've been struggling to describe this album, which I personally think is a good thing. That the music that you make is what I would describe as left field. Would you own that?
Yeah, especially by today's standards, because everything is so in accordance to category nowadays. I don't know exactly how things are in the UK, but in America, if your skin is a certain tone, if you talk with a certain twang, you immediately have to do all the music that's associated with that stereotype. So then you have stations that play the twangers, stations that play the people who do street lingo. You have stations that play jazz, stations that play smooth jazz. But I grew up in an era, in the FM, the glorious FM era of the 70s in the United States, where you'd have DJs who do their own programming, and they would just go to a record shop, find some obscure album, love an album cut on it, and just start playing it.
That's me. I'm still doing that.
Yeah, and what I am a frustrated DJ, because I was a music lover and a music buyer before I ever became a composer. And what this album is sort of me composing and producing my own varied tracks for my radio show.
That's how it is. You see, I've been trying to make comparisons, and there were some comparisons to some of the kind of psychedelic funk kind of stuff that was happening in the 70s.
Well, George Clinton was he was one of the biggest influences, and the reason I even came to Detroit, because in 1979 he had a record label called Thang Incorporated. I don't know if you ever heard the song Knee Deep.
I will defer to my 1970s funk correspondent, Tony Cummings here, who is an expert on the music of that era.
Yeah, and particularly George Clinton, because, of course, I knew George very well from the time when I was a black music journalist in the 60s and 70s, and was with him when they were Parliament and, before they became Funkadelic, and followed him through that wild era. Of course, that whole thing about that era, and I could see it from close quarters, it was very drug-driven. I assume that you don't imbibe yourself.
No, I feel that actually it was more drug-impeded. And I think the perfect example of that is Sly Stone. Because I think Sly Stone comes as close to being the Mozart of our time in R&B as anyone. And you look at the difference in what he was from just before he did There's a Riot Going On to There's a Riot Going On.
Yeah.
And by the time he released There's a Riot Going On, I've read reports that he was into drugs, and he was basically being advised by a thug, which nowadays would make you a hip-hop star.
Yeah, true. But so do I detect then that you got a somewhat critical view towards modern R&B?
Yeah, because it really isn't R&B. It's built on a structure of hip hop. When I grew up and I was coming along in music was structured. R&B music especially was structured in such a way. And then again, I have to also include what Berry Gordy did with Motown, where there were jazz elements, classical music elements. Everything that was good music was put in a grinder, and what came out was basically an R&B pudding with lots of different varied elements, like making ice cream. What has happened is hip-hop came along as a spice, and I thought it was an excellent spice, but it's gone from being just a spice in music to being the entree.
Yeah.
And, instead of having a nice Italian dinner with a little oregano on it, you're having oregano cakes.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Talk about your own music then. Are you sort of very much into kind of melting pots mentality still? Trying to mix in elements from all kinds of things, from memory, from personal tastes, and putting it all together and then kind of hardly knowing what's going to come out? Yeah,
it's sort of my music and my literary writing kind of cross along the same areas. And I have a writing style that I call jazz literary, because it's almost built on the same rules as playing jazz and composing jazz. A lot of improvisation, a lot of controlled flow of consciousness writing and such. And what I do with music is I sort of come up with a premise, and I let the music take me where it wants to go. The only difference is, if the genre is supposed to be rock, then I stay within the limits of rock, in the same way that a jazz player can play anything he wants as long as it fits into the chord that's played at the time. And sometimes you can break the rules as long as you resolve to the next chord. I hope I'm not being too abstruse, because I have a tendency to be so.
No, we're all musos in the studio, so you're fine with us.
Okay.
I want to play some music, actually, because we're talking about music is like dancing about architecture, said Frank Zappa. So we ought to play some music and let people hear what you're talking about.
All right.
Kind of fly away with you is one that you were saying is going down well. So shall we play that?
Please do.
Okay, then we'll talk again to SIDney Howard. We're talking to SIDney Howard from SIDzCarbonatedMilk.